My daughter Claire Mason stood in the middle of her glittering boutique launch and told a room full of strangers that I had ruined her future. Not Brandon Cole, the man whispering business promises in her ear. Not the debt piling up behind her polished displays. Me. Her mother. I had emptied savings, paid rent, covered inventory, and carried her dream when it was still just sketches on napkins. But the night I refused to sign one more loan against the house her father left me, Claire looked at me like I was her enemy. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I simply walked out, and the next morning, I stopped funding everything. If you've ever been hurt by someone you sacrificed for, please like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what you would have done. Also, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. I truly read every comment. My husband, Robert Mason, used to say that Portland rain could either make you bitter or make you patient. After 40 years in Oregon, I think it did both to me. The morning after Claire told me I had ruined her future, I sat alone in my kitchen listening to rain tap softly against the windows over the sink. Robert's old coffee mug was still in the cabinet beside mine, even though he'd been gone for almost 4 years. I don't know why I kept it there. Maybe because moving it would make his death feel permanent in a way I still wasn't ready to accept. Some mornings, I could still hear his boots on the hardwood floor. Some mornings, I could still imagine him walking into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from his eyes, asking if I wanted eggs or pancakes. But grief is strange. It lets you keep tiny pieces while stealing the whole person. Robert died from a heart attack 3 weeks after his 63rd birthday. One minute, he was standing in our garage sanding the leg of a dining table he'd been building for a customer, and the next minute, he was on the floor gasping for air while I screamed into the phone for an ambulance. I never forgot the way his hand squeezed mine in the hospital. Not hard, not dramatic, just enough to say goodbye. Robert had been a carpenter his entire life. He wasn't rich. We never lived in some giant house with luxury cars in the driveway. But he was the kind of man who could fix almost anything with patience and steady hands. People trusted him because he never cheated anyone. If he promised a job would be finished by Friday, it was finished by Friday. That kind of integrity feels rare now. Before he died, Robert made sure I would at least be safe. He left me our small house in Portland, a modest savings account, and a life insurance policy that wasn't huge, but was enough to keep me comfortable if I stayed careful. And I did stay careful. For years, I worked long shifts managing a neighborhood bakery called Sweet Maple Cafe. I packed away every extra dollar. I clipped coupons. I drove the same Subaru until the heater barely worked. I skipped vacations. I ignored the cracks in the kitchen tile because replacing them felt unnecessary. Because every time I thought about spending money on myself, I thought about Claire instead. Claire was our only child. And from the time she was little, she dreamed in colors and fabric. When she was 9 years old, she cut apart one of my old floral curtains because she wanted to make dresses for her dolls. I remember pretending to be angry while Robert laughed so hard he nearly fell off his chair. "She's got talent," he said that night, while we cleaned fabric scraps from the floor. "She's got destruction in her hands," I answered. But secretly, I kept every tiny dress she made. Claire always saw beauty where other people saw ordinary things. She could walk into a thrift store and point at an ugly old jacket hanging in the corner and somehow describe exactly how she'd transform it into something elegant. In high school, she filled sketchbooks with clothing designs instead of taking notes during math class. In college, she studied fashion merchandising in Seattle for 2 years before dropping out because tuition became too expensive. I still remember how ashamed she looked when she came home. "I failed," she whispered. "No," I told her. "You paused. There's a difference." At least that's what mothers tell their children when they're trying to protect their hearts. After Robert died, Claire became softer with me for a while. She called more often. She came over on Sundays and helped me plant flowers in the backyard because she knew gardening reminded me of him. Then one evening, about 2 years ago, she sat across from me at this same kitchen table with tears in her eyes and excitement trembling in her voice. "Mom," she said, "I think I finally found my chance." She showed me pictures on her laptop of a retail space downtown. Exposed brick walls, big windows, white shelving. The kind of place that looked expensive even when it was empty. "I want to open my own boutique," she said. I remember staring at her face while she talked. She looked alive again. Not just happy. Alive. The kind of alive a person becomes when they finally believe their life could still turn into something meaningful. "What would you call it?" I asked. "Luna and Lace." She smiled when she said it, almost shyly, like she was afraid I'd laugh. But I didn't laugh. I cried. Because for the first time since Robert died, I felt like maybe something beautiful could still grow out of all our loss. Claire reached across the table and grabbed my hands. "I know it's risky," she said, "but I really think I can do this." And I believed her. God help me, I believed every word. Over the next several months, I poured money into that dream. I paid the security deposit on the retail space. I helped cover the first 6 months of rent. I bought clothing racks, mirrors, shelving, and lighting fixtures. I paid for part of the inventory. I even dipped into a portion of Robert's life insurance money to help Claire hire a web designer because she insisted online sales would be critical. Every time I handed her another check, Claire hugged me tightly and said things like, "You're the only person who's ever truly believed in me." Or, "I'm going to make you proud, Mom." And for a while, I thought I already was proud. I spent weekends at Luna and Lace helping steam clothes and fold inventory. I brought coffee to the employees during setup days. Sometimes I stayed late dusting shelves while Claire worked on displays. Those were some of my happiest moments. Not because of the store, because I thought my daughter and I had become a team. Then Brandon Cole appeared. The first time I met him, he walked into the boutique wearing a camel-colored coat that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. He was handsome in a polished kind of way, with perfect teeth, and the kind of confidence that fills a room before a person even speaks. Claire introduced him with excitement glowing in her eyes. "Mom, this is Brandon. He's helping me with branding strategy." Branding strategy. I remember thinking that sounded like a very expensive phrase. Brandon shook my hand and smiled warmly. "You must be the incredible woman funding this vision," he said. At the time, I thought it sounded respectful. Now I realize he never called me Claire's mother first. Only the woman funding the vision. And slowly, after Brandon entered our lives, my daughter began changing in ways I couldn't yet explain. At first, I told myself Brandon Cole was exactly what Claire needed. That's the dangerous thing about manipulation. It rarely arrives looking evil. It usually arrives dressed as confidence, ambition, and opportunity. For the first few weeks after Brandon joined Luna and Lace, everything seemed exciting. Claire talked faster, smiled bigger, and suddenly carried herself like someone on the edge of becoming important. "Mom, Brandon says we need to think bigger." "Mom, Brandon knows people in luxury retail." "Mom, Brandon says small businesses fail because owners think too small." At first I nodded along because I wanted to support her. But slowly, the boutique I had helped build began turning into something I barely recognized. The original idea for Luna and Lace had been simple. Claire wanted a warm boutique filled with carefully selected clothing, handmade jewelry from local artists, and customized vintage pieces she redesigned herself. That version sounded beautiful to me. Manageable. Real. But Brandon started changing everything. One afternoon, I walked into the boutique carrying sandwiches and coffee for the employees, only to find 2 men drilling expensive marble panels into the front counter. I stared in confusion. "What happened to the wooden counter?" I asked. Claire barely looked up from her laptop. Brandon said it looked too rustic. I blinked. But Robert built that counter. For a second, something uncomfortable flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe, but it disappeared quickly. We need a cleaner luxury image, Mom. Luxury image. That phrase started appearing everywhere. The shelves Robert helped install replaced. The warm yellow lighting Claire originally loved replaced with brighter designer fixtures. The local handmade jewelry slowly removed in favor of expensive branded accessories Brandon insisted would attract higher value customers. Every week brought another expense, another redesign, another invoice, and somehow every change made the boutique feel colder. More polished? Yes, but less like Claire. Still, I kept helping. Because mothers are experts at ignoring small pains when they believe love will eventually make the sacrifice worth it. I worked mornings at the bakery and spent evenings at Luna and Lace, folding clothes and steaming garments, while Claire and Brandon discussed brand identity over wine and takeout sushi. Sometimes I sat quietly pretending not to notice how often Brandon interrupted her, or how quickly Claire stopped defending her own ideas when he disagreed. One evening, while I was organizing inventory in the back room, I overheard them arguing softly near the front register. "We can't afford this campaign," Claire whispered. "We can't afford not to," Brandon answered immediately. "We already spent $12,000 on the launch event, and if the launch looks cheap, nobody important will take you seriously." There was silence. Then Brandon's voice softened. "Claire, you said you wanted to build something extraordinary. Extraordinary businesses require risk." I peeked around the corner. Claire looked exhausted. Dark circles sat beneath her eyes, and her fingers trembled slightly while holding her phone. But when Brandon touched her shoulder, she nodded. That moment stayed with me longer than I expected. Not because I thought they were having an affair, because I recognized the look on my daughter's face. Dependency. The kind that makes people stop trusting themselves. About 2 months before the grand opening, Claire began asking me for money more frequently. At first, the requests sounded temporary. "We just need a little extra cash flow until launch." Or, "The return on investment will be huge once sales start." Then the amounts grew larger. $5,000 for influencer partnerships, $3,000 for custom shopping bags, $8,000 for digital marketing, $12,000 for a VIP brand consultant. I stopped understanding where the money was even going. One rainy Tuesday evening, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by receipts while Claire paced nearby explaining why she needed another transfer. "Brandon says we need stronger visibility before opening." I rubbed my forehead. "Claire, I already gave you money for marketing." That was phase 1. Phase 1 of what she sighed dramatically. "Mom, this is how modern businesses work." I looked down at the numbers again. Even after all my contributions, the boutique still hadn't officially opened. "How much have we spent so far?" I asked carefully. Claire froze for half a second. That tiny pause scared me more than any number could have. "I don't know the exact total." I stared at her. "You don't know we're investing in growth." "That's not what I asked." Her jaw tightened. "Why are you suddenly interrogating me?" Interrogating? That word hurt, because I wasn't some banker demanding repayment. I was her mother, the woman draining her savings account to keep her dream alive. "I'm not interrogating you," I said quietly. "I'm trying to understand." Claire crossed her arms. "Brandon warned me this would happen." A chill moved through me. "What does that mean?" He said older generations panic when they see big startup expenses because they don't understand scaling. Scaling, brand positioning, market visibility, luxury identity. Every conversation now sounded like a business podcast instead of my daughter. I leaned back slowly in my chair. "Claire?" I asked gently, "Are you happy?" The question caught her off guard. For 1 second, I saw the old Claire again. The little girl who used to sew ribbons onto thrift store jackets while humming to herself in the living room. Then her expression hardened. "I'll be happy when people finally take me seriously." That answer broke my heart more than I let her see, because suddenly I understood something terrifying. This wasn't only about fashion anymore. It was about validation, about proving she mattered. And people desperate to prove they matter are the easiest people in the world to manipulate. A few days later, I arrived at Luna and Lace earlier than usual and found Brandon alone inside reviewing spreadsheets on a tablet. He smiled when he saw me. "Diana. Early start today. I brought muffins. God, I wish I had your energy." I set the box down near the register. Then my eyes landed on several printed invoices scattered beside his tablet. One invoice immediately caught my attention. Cole Creative Group Brand Expansion Consulting. Amount due $8,750. I frowned. "What's Cole Creative Group?" Brandon barely glanced up. "My consulting company." I looked at him carefully. "You own the company receiving these payments?" "Of course." The answer came so casually that for a second, I wondered if I was the unreasonable one. "How many payments have gone to your company?" He smiled politely. "That's standard in business consulting." That wasn't my question. For the first time, his expression changed slightly. Not anger, annoyance. "Claire approved every expense." I folded my arms. "But Claire is using money I provided?" His smile tightened. "With respect, Diana, once money enters a business account, emotional attachment becomes dangerous." Emotional attachment. Imagine saying that to a mother who mortgaged her peace of mind for her child. Claire walked in before I could answer. The moment she noticed the tension, her shoulders stiffened. "What's going on? I'm asking questions," I said calmly. Claire immediately looked defensive. "Mom, not now. I just want transparency. You don't trust me." There it was again. Not concern about the money, not explanation, only offense that I dared ask. I looked around the boutique, the expensive displays, the luxury packaging, the giant promotional posters featuring models Claire had hired for thousands of dollars. Everything suddenly felt unstable, like a beautiful house built over a sinkhole. And for the first time since Luna and Lace began, fear settled heavily into my chest. Not fear of losing money, fear of losing my daughter to a dream that no longer belonged to her. A week after I discovered the invoices connected to Brandon's company, I convinced myself I was overreacting. That's another thing mothers do when they're afraid of losing their children. We soften the truth until it becomes easier to survive. I kept telling myself Claire was stressed. Opening a business was difficult. Of course she was overwhelmed. Of course she was emotional. Of course she snapped sometimes. But deep down, something had already shifted between us. Not loudly, quietly, like a crack spreading beneath a frozen lake. One Thursday afternoon, I stopped by Luna and Lace carrying tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwiches from the cafe where I worked. Portland rain had soaked through my coat, and my fingers were numb from the cold. Claire used to love rainy days when she was little. She'd sit by the living room window wrapped in blankets while Robert made hot chocolate. Sometimes she'd sketch dresses for hours while jazz music played softly through the house. Back then, she always smiled when she saw me. Now I noticed she sighed first. The boutique looked beautiful that afternoon. Warm lights reflected against polished mirrors, and soft instrumental music drifted through hidden speakers. Expensive perfumes scented the air. Everything looked luxurious, but nothing felt warm anymore. I stepped quietly toward the back office when I heard voices near the fitting rooms. Claire's voice, and another woman's. I'm just saying, the employee whispered carefully. Your mom seems really supportive. Claire laughed softly. She means well, but honestly, she's holding the brand back. I stopped walking. Every muscle in my body went still. The employee hesitated. What do you mean? Claire sighed dramatically. She still thinks like everything's a little neighborhood boutique? Brandon understands where this business could actually go. Something sharp moved through my chest. Not anger at first. Just disbelief. Because I suddenly realized my daughter talked about me differently when I wasn't in the room. She worries too much, Claire continued. Every investment scares her? The employee nodded awkwardly. I guess parents can be like that. Claire laughed again. No, my mom takes it to another level. I stared down at the soup containers in my hands while heat slowly disappeared from my face. There are moments in life when your heart doesn't break dramatically. It breaks quietly, without witnesses, without anyone noticing except you. I forced myself to breathe before walking forward. Claire looked up and immediately smiled too brightly. Mom, you didn't tell me you were coming. I lifted the takeout bag slightly. I brought lunch. For a second, guilt flashed across her face, but only for a second. That's sweet. Sweet. Not thank you, not I missed you. Just sweet. The employee slipped away awkwardly, pretending to organize clothing racks. I set the food down in the office kitchenette. You should eat before everything gets cold. Claire glanced toward the front of the boutique. I can only stay a minute. We have a client coming. Client. Everything sounded corporate now. We stood there in silence while rain tapped against the windows outside. Then Claire's phone buzzed. Her entire face changed instantly when she looked at the screen. Excitement, energy, attention. Brandon's here, she said. Not Brandon is here. Brandon's here. Like the arrival of someone important. A few minutes later, he walked into the boutique carrying garment bags and coffee cups like he owned the place. Ladies, he said smoothly. He handed Claire a latte first. Not me. Not the woman funding half the business. Claire immediately walked beside him while he explained something about a luxury networking event in Seattle. I stood there holding soup containers nobody cared about anymore. Then the front door opened. A woman wearing a designer coat stepped inside, followed by another younger woman carrying a tablet. Claire instantly straightened her posture. That's Vanessa Reed, she whispered excitedly. She owns 3 boutiques in California. Brandon smiled proudly. She's exploring investment opportunities. Investment opportunities. My stomach tightened. Claire rushed forward to greet the woman while Brandon followed beside her like a proud campaign manager. I stood quietly near the office doorway while they toured the store. Claire sounded different around wealthy people. Sharper, more polished, almost rehearsed. Then I heard something that hurt more than I expected. Vanessa gestured toward me politely. And who's this? Claire barely looked over. Oh, this is my mom. She helps sometimes. Helps sometimes. I felt the blood drain from my face. Not she financed the store. Not she believed in me before anyone else did. Not. Without her, none of this would exist. Just, she helps sometimes? Brandon immediately redirected the conversation. The real genius is Claire's vision, he said smoothly. Claire smiled at him with gratitude, and I suddenly understood something terrifying. My sacrifices had become invisible because they were expected. The people who make the most noise about success often receive all the credit, while the people quietly holding everything together disappear into the background. After Vanessa left, Claire was practically glowing. She loved the store, she said excitedly. She seemed impressed, I answered carefully. She asked about expansion possibilities. My stomach sank. What kind of expansion? Claire looked at Brandon before answering. Seattle. I stared at her. You haven't even officially opened this location yet. Brandon leaned casually against the counter. That's exactly why expansion conversations matter now. Momentum is everything in luxury retail. Claire nodded eagerly. We could become regional within 2 years. Regional? 2 years ago, she just wanted a small boutique. I looked directly at Claire. How much would something like that cost? She hesitated. Then Brandon answered instead. Roughly $150,000 for initial scaling. I almost laughed because the number sounded unreal. $150,000? It's actually conservative, Brandon said calmly. I turned back to Claire. Tell me you're not seriously considering this. Mom? No. Tell me. Claire crossed her arms immediately. Why are you acting like growth is a bad thing because businesses need profit before expansion? You sound afraid? I sound practical. Brandon stepped in smoothly. Fear and practicality often look identical from the outside. I ignored him. Claire, are you making enough money right now to cover basic operating costs without borrowing more? Her silence answered everything. I lowered my voice. Honey, you're moving too fast. That was the wrong thing to say. Her entire expression hardened. No, she snapped. You just don't understand ambition. The words hit me harder than I expected, because I had spent my entire life sacrificing for her ambitions. I worked double shifts when she needed school supplies. I skipped vacations so she could attend fashion workshops. I used my dead husband's insurance money to build her boutique. And somehow in her eyes, I was the obstacle. Brandon stepped closer to her protectively. Claire has real potential, Diana. I never said she didn't. Then trust her. I do trust her. But even while saying it, I realized something painful. I didn't trust him. And worse than that, I wasn't sure Claire trusted herself anymore either. Claire grabbed a folder from the counter and handed it toward me. We need a guarantor for the expansion loan. I didn't take it. My pulse began thudding slowly in my ears. What does that mean exactly? It means if I sign too, the bank will approve everything faster. And what are they using as collateral? Claire looked away. That was all the answer I needed. The house, I whispered. Mom, it's temporary no. The word came out before I even thought about it. Claire blinked. Brandon's expression darkened slightly. You didn't even read the proposal, Claire said sharply. I don't need to read paperwork risking the only home your father left me. Claire stared at me like I'd slapped her. Then came the sentence that cracked something inside me. You always said you believed in me, she whispered. Now you're proving you never did. I looked at my daughter standing inside the boutique I helped build beside a man collecting money from her dreams, and for the first time in my life, I didn't recognize her. 3 days after Claire asked me to risk my house for her expansion loan, she called and invited me to dinner. Her voice sounded calmer than it had during our argument at the boutique. I think we should talk, she said quietly. For a moment, hope returned so fast it almost embarrassed me. Maybe she had cooled down. Maybe she realized how dangerous the loan was. Maybe she missed me too. Okay, I answered softly. It's at our place tonight, 7 o'clock. Our place. She had started calling Ryan's townhouse our place months ago, even though they weren't married yet. I used to think it sounded sweet. That night, I spent almost an hour deciding what to wear. That's the humiliating thing about motherhood. Even after your heart gets bruised, you still want your child to smile when they see you. I finally chose a dark green sweater Robert once told me brought out my eyes. Then I baked Claire's favorite lemon loaf cake from scratch, the same recipe I'd made for her birthdays since she was 12. While the cake cooled on the counter, I caught myself imagining reconciliation. Claire apologizing, me hugging her, both of us crying a little. I should have known life rarely gives us healing that easily. Rain drizzled lightly over Portland as I drove to Ryan's townhouse. The porch lights glowed warm against the wet pavement, and for one small moment, everything looked peaceful. Then I walked inside, and immediately realized this wasn't a family dinner. The dining table was fully set with wine glasses and candles. Ryan stood near the kitchen opening a bottle of red wine, looking strangely nervous. And sitting at the table already scrolling through his phone was Brandon Cole. The sight of him sitting there like he belonged in our family made my stomach tighten instantly. Claire hurried over and kissed my cheek quickly. "You made the lemon cake," she said distractedly. "You used to love it." "I still do." But she didn't sound like she meant it. Ryan took my coat politely. "Good to see you, Diana." "You too." He gave me a sympathetic smile that only made me more uncomfortable. Then Brandon stood smoothly and pulled out a chair for me. "Diana, glad you came." I sat down, slowly. The atmosphere felt rehearsed. Like everyone else, already knew the script except me. Dinner started awkwardly polite. Ryan talked about real estate prices rising in Portland. Claire discussed foot traffic near the boutique. Brandon kept steering the conversation back toward business growth. "The Seattle market is exploding right now," he said confidently, "especially for curated luxury fashion experiences." I quietly buttered my dinner roll. Claire leaned forward eagerly. "Vanessa Reed said the same thing." Brandon nodded. "Exactly. Momentum matters more than perfection." I looked at Claire carefully. "Has the Portland store even turned a profit yet?" The table went quiet for half a second. Then Brandon smiled calmly. "Profitability timelines vary for premium brands. That wasn't my question." Claire sighed loudly. "Mom?" "No, seriously." Has it? Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Claire took a sip of wine before answering. "We're building infrastructure. That means no." Her jaw tightened. "You always reduce everything to fear?" I set down my fork. "And you keep treating concern like betrayal?" Brandon leaned back casually. "With respect, Diana, every successful entrepreneur has people around them who doubt them." I turned toward him fully for the first time that evening. "And every manipulative businessman tells young dreamers they're misunderstood geniuses." The temperature in the room changed instantly. Ryan looked down at his plate. Claire stared at me in disbelief. Brandon's smile barely moved, but his eyes sharpened slightly. "I'm not your enemy," he said smoothly. "No," I answered quietly. "But you're certainly not my daughter's father either, so stop speaking like you know what's best for her future." Claire slammed her wine glass down harder than she intended. "Can we not do this tonight? Then tell me why I'm here." Silence. Claire glanced toward Brandon. That tiny glance told me everything. This dinner had never been about repairing our relationship. It was about pressure. Emotional pressure, family pressure, public pressure. Ryan finally cleared his throat awkwardly. "Claire thinks if the Seattle location opens quickly, it could attract national attention." I looked at him gently. "And what do you think?" He hesitated. That hesitation mattered. "I think—" He started slowly. "I think Claire's incredibly talented." "That's not what I asked." Ryan rubbed the back of his neck. "I think opportunities like this don't happen often." Brandon nodded approvingly. "Exactly." Then he reached beside his chair and lifted a leather folder onto the table. There it was. The real reason for dinner. Claire pushed the folder toward me carefully. "It's just the preliminary paperwork. I didn't touch it." "What exactly are you asking me to sign?" Claire inhaled slowly, already irritated. "The bank needs additional security before approving expansion funding." And the security is my house. It's temporary collateral. No collateral is temporary if the business fails. Claire's expression hardened again. Why do you keep talking like failure is inevitable? Because risk is real. Risk is part of success, and so is bankruptcy. Brandon spoke calmly, almost like a therapist managing conflict. Diana, fear-based thinking can unintentionally sabotage growth. I laughed softly in disbelief. Fear-based thinking. That's what protecting the last home my husband ever lived in had become. Ryan finally spoke again. The projections actually look strong. I looked directly at him. Have you personally reviewed all the financial records? His silence answered before his mouth did. Claire immediately jumped in defensively. Brandon handles most of the financial strategy. There it was again. Not I handle. Brandon handles. I turned toward my daughter slowly. How much money have you already spent paying Brandon's company? Her face changed instantly. That's irrelevant. It's absolutely relevant. Brandon's voice cooled noticeably. My consulting fees are industry standard. I didn't ask you. Claire crossed her arms. You're embarrassing me. The words landed harder than she probably intended. I looked around the candlelit table, at Ryan, avoiding eye contact, at Brandon, sitting comfortably inside my daughter's decisions, at Claire, staring at me like I was the obstacle standing between her and greatness. And suddenly, I felt tired. Not angry, just deeply, painfully tired. I need full accounting records before I sign anything, I said quietly. Claire stared at me. You don't trust me? I don't trust what's happening around you. That's the same thing. No, I answered softly. It isn't. Brandon exhaled slowly like a disappointed executive. Delays could cost us investors? What investors? I asked immediately. He paused. Claire jumped in too quickly. We're in conversations. With who, Mom? It's confidential. Conveniently confidential. I folded my hands together calmly. If strangers are willing to invest in this business, then why does the bank need my house so badly? Nobody answered. The silence said more than words ever could. Claire suddenly pushed her chair back. You know what she snapped? Maybe Brandon was right about you. My chest tightened. What does that mean? He said you'd panic the moment things became serious? I stared at her. I gave you almost everything I had, and now you're holding it over my head. My voice dropped lower. I'm trying to protect you. No, Claire shot back instantly. You're trying to control me because you can't stand the idea of me becoming more successful than you ever were. The room went completely silent. Even Brandon looked surprised she had said it out loud. For a second, I honestly couldn't breathe, because that accusation revealed something much uglier beneath all the money and business talk. Resentment. My daughter didn't see sacrifice anymore. She saw limitation. I stood slowly from the table. Ryan immediately looked ashamed. Diana. But I raised my hand gently. No. I picked up the untouched lemon cake from the counter. The same cake Claire used to beg me to make every birthday. The same cake I stayed up late baking, because part of me still believed love could fix this. Claire didn't stop me as I walked toward the door, and somehow that hurt more than the argument itself. Outside, cold rain soaked through my sweater almost instantly. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, while tears blurred the windshield lights into streaks of gold and red. Then I remembered something Robert once told me years ago. When people start treating your love like an obligation, he said they stop seeing your sacrifice as a gift. That night, for the first time, I began wondering if Claire no longer saw me as her mother, only as the woman standing between her and more money. The following Monday, I called in sick to the bakery for the first time in almost 3 years. Not because I was physically ill, because I was emotionally exhausted. I spent the morning sitting at my kitchen table, staring at a stack of receipts, invoices, and bank statements spread across the wood like pieces of a puzzle I no longer wanted to solve. Outside, Portland rain painted gray streaks across the windows. The house felt too quiet. Ever since Robert died, silence had become something alive inside these walls. Some days it comforted me. Other days it swallowed me whole. I picked up one invoice after another. Marketing campaign, brand strategy consultation, VIP launch coordination, digital positioning package. Every expensive phrase sounded emptier the longer I looked at it. Around noon, I finally did something I should have done months earlier. I called Susan Whitaker. Susan had been my best friend since we were 22 years old and working together at a grocery store outside Eugene. She was practical in a way I'd never managed to be. Where I softened hard truths, Susan stared directly at them. She arrived an hour later, carrying grocery store coffee and wearing her usual waterproof boots. The moment she stepped into my kitchen, she took one look at the paperwork covering the table and frowned. "Oh, Diana," she sighed softly. "How bad is it?" I laughed weakly. "That depends on how much denial you think I've been living in." Susan sat down slowly. "Start talking." So I did. I told her everything. The boutique, the money, the expansion plans, the pressure at dinner, the loan using my house as collateral, the invoices connected to Brandon's company, and finally, Claire's words. "You can't stand the idea of me becoming more successful than you ever were." Saying the sentence out loud hurt all over again. Susan listened quietly without interrupting. Only once did her expression truly harden. "When did Brandon enter the picture? About 6 months ago? And before him, Claire still stressed about money sometimes, but—" I swallowed hard. She still sounded like herself. Susan nodded slowly. "That man is dangerous." I rubbed my temples. "Claire thinks I'm sabotaging her?" "No," Susan corrected gently. "Claire thinks saying yes to her means loving her." The sentence settled heavily inside me because I knew Susan was right. For years, every time Claire struggled, I fixed it. Not because she demanded it, because I couldn't bear watching her hurt. When she couldn't afford summer camp as a child, I worked extra shifts. When she dropped out of college, I covered her apartment deposit back home. When her old car died, I emptied part of my emergency savings to help replace it. And now she no longer saw my help as sacrifice. She saw it as expectation. Susan reached for one of the invoices. "How much total have you given her?" I hesitated, then whispered the number. Susan slowly lowered the paper. "Diana, I know." "No, I don't think you do." I stared down at my coffee cup. "That money was supposed to be my safety net after Robert died." Susan's voice softened immediately. "Then why did you keep giving more?" The answer came before I could stop it, because every time Claire looked disappointed in me, I felt like I was failing as a mother. The room went quiet. Susan leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "That's not motherhood," she said carefully. "That's emotional survival." I looked at her sharply. "What does that mean?" "It means you've spent years trying to keep Claire happy because her unhappiness makes you feel guilty." I wanted to argue, but I couldn't, because somewhere deep down I knew she was describing me perfectly. Susan began sorting the paperwork into neat piles. "Okay," she said firmly. "Now we stop reacting emotionally and start looking at facts." For the next 2 hours, we reviewed every invoice and bank transfer connected to Luna and Lace. The deeper we looked, the worse it became. Several payments to Cole Creative Group were far larger than I originally realized. $7,000, $12,000, $9,000. Some listed vague descriptions like luxury expansion strategy, market penetration consulting, Digital influence structuring. The wording sounded intentionally confusing. Susan frowned harder with every page. These aren't normal consulting invoices for a small boutique. My stomach twisted. You think he's stealing from her? I think he's profiting heavily from convincing Claire bigger spending equals bigger success. That sentence hit me hard because it explained almost everything. Claire wasn't chasing stability anymore. She was chasing the image of success, and Brandon was selling that image back to her at a premium. Susan opened her laptop and started searching public business records. 10 minutes later, she turned the screen toward me. Cole Creative Group, LLC. Registered owner Brandon Cole. Business age less than 2 years. Very few public client records. I stared at the screen. This doesn't make sense. Susan nodded. It makes perfect sense if his business depends on inexperienced owners spending emotionally instead of logically. I leaned back, slowly feeling nauseated. I should have stopped this sooner. No, Susan corrected. You should stop it now. That afternoon, I drove to the bank alone. The same bank Robert and I used for almost 30 years. The same bank where we once sat together planning Claire's college savings account. A young loan officer named Marcus invited me into his office after I explained the situation. He reviewed the preliminary loan paperwork Claire had emailed me days earlier. His expression became more serious with every page. Finally, he folded his hands carefully. Mrs. Mason, if you sign this agreement, your property becomes part of the collateral structure. I swallowed hard. And if the business fails, the bank could pursue repayment through secured assets. Secured assets. Such cold words for something that carried my entire life inside it. That house wasn't just property. It was Robert's laugh in the garage. Claire's childhood height marks on the laundry room wall. Christmas mornings. Anniversary dinners. Grief. Memory. Love. I drove home afterward, feeling hollow. Rain blurred the streets while Robert's voice echoed through my mind. Don't spend your peace trying to buy someone else's love. At the time, years ago, I thought he was talking about friendships or difficult relatives. Now I realized he might have been warning me about something much closer. That evening, Claire called 3 times. I didn't answer. Then she texted, "Why are you shutting me out?" Another text followed seconds later. Brandon says delaying the paperwork could hurt investor confidence. Investor confidence. Everything now sounded like business language instead of family. I stared at the phone screen for a long time before finally setting it face down on the counter. Then I opened my laptop and reviewed the automatic transfers linked to Luna and Lace. Monthly rent assistance, inventory payments, software subscriptions, marketing installments. For months, money had quietly flowed out of my account like water leaking through a cracked foundation. And suddenly, I understood something painful. I had spent so much time trying to save Claire's dream that I never asked whether the dream was destroying her or destroying me. Late that night, Susan called before bed. You okay? No, I admitted honestly. That's normal. I stared at the dark kitchen around me. What if stopping financial help makes her hate me? Susan was quiet for a moment. Then she asked softly, "And what if continuing ruins both of you?" I had no answer for that, because deep inside, I was beginning to realize something terrifying. Saying no to Claire might be the only loving thing I had left to give her. The night of the VIP launch arrived with cold October rain and a sky the color of wet cement. Portland looked beautiful in that melancholy way only rainy cities can. Streetlights reflected gold against slick sidewalks, and downtown buzzed with people carrying umbrellas beneath glowing storefront windows. Luna and Lace stood on the corner like something out of a magazine. Tall windows, cream-colored displays, soft lighting spilling onto the sidewalk. For months, Claire had talked about this night as if it would change everything. Maybe she was right, just not in the way she imagined. I stood in my bedroom for almost 20 minutes before deciding what to wear. Every outfit suddenly made me feel either too old, too plain, or too invisible. Finally, I reached for the dark blue dress Robert bought me years earlier for our anniversary dinner at a small seafood restaurant on the coast. The fabric was simple, elegant in a quiet way. Robert used to say I looked beautiful in blue because it softened my face. I hadn't worn the dress since his funeral reception. As I fastened the earrings Claire gave me on my 60th birthday, I stared at my reflection and barely recognized the woman looking back. Not because I looked older, because I looked tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. Before leaving, I paused near the hallway table where Robert's framed photograph still sat. "You always knew people better than I did," I whispered softly. Then I grabbed my coat and left. The boutique was already crowded when I arrived. Music floated through hidden speakers while servers carried champagne glasses between guests dressed in expensive coats and designer shoes. Influencers posed near floral displays taking photographs for social media. Laughter echoed beneath the warm lights. Everything looked successful. That was the dangerous part. Failure rarely announces itself at the beginning. Sometimes it arrives wearing diamonds and smiling for cameras. The moment Claire spotted me near the entrance, I saw tension cross her face. Not happiness, not relief, tension. She hurried toward me quickly. "Mom," she said under her breath, "you came. You invited me." Her eyes moved briefly over my dress, and there it was again. That tiny flicker of embarrassment. "You could have worn something a little more modern," she murmured quietly. The words weren't cruel enough for anyone else to notice, but daughters know exactly where to place the knife. I forced a small smile. "This dress was special to your father." Claire immediately looked guilty. For 1 second. Then the moment vanished because Brandon appeared beside her, carrying 2 champagne glasses. "There's our favorite investor," he said smoothly. "Investor, not mother, not Diana, just investor." He handed Claire a champagne glass first before finally acknowledging me with a polite smile. "You look lovely tonight." I nodded once. "Thank you." Brandon leaned slightly toward Claire. "Vanessa Reed just arrived, and the investors from Seattle are expected any minute." Claire's face brightened instantly. "I need to greet them." Then she looked at me carefully. "We should probably talk about the paperwork tonight if possible." There it was. Even tonight. Even now. I stared at my daughter standing inside the business I helped build with money from my dead husband's insurance policy. And all she could think about was getting my signature. "I'm not discussing loans tonight," I said quietly. Claire's jaw tightened immediately. "Mom, not tonight." Brandon stepped in with practiced calm. "Big opportunities move quickly, Diana, and responsible people move carefully." For the first time all evening, his smile faded slightly. Claire exhaled sharply. "Can you please not do this here?" I almost laughed, as if I had created the tension, as if I had dragged business contracts into family moments. But before I could answer, another group of guests approached Claire excitedly, pulling her attention away. Within seconds, she was smiling brightly again for everyone else. I wandered slowly through the boutique while conversations buzzed around me. "You can tell this brand has huge potential. The aesthetic is incredible. She's going to franchise eventually." Every compliment fed Claire like oxygen, and the more attention she received, the less she seemed to notice me at all. Near the back display wall, I overheard 2 women discussing Brandon. "He's brilliant with luxury startups. He transformed the whole image." I stood silently pretending to examine handbags while something cold settled deeper inside me. Not one person knew who actually paid for most of this. Not one person knew I had spent years sacrificing stability so Claire could stand in this room tonight. To everyone else, I was just an older woman wandering quietly through the party. Eventually, Ryan found me near the refreshment table. "You okay?" he asked softly. I looked at him carefully. Ryan wasn't a bad man. That almost made things harder, because I could see he genuinely loved Claire. But love without courage becomes dangerous too. "I don't think Claire's okay," I admitted. Ryan glanced toward her across the room. She stood beside Brandon, laughing at something an investor had said, her eyes bright with excitement. "She's under pressure," he said carefully. "She's addicted to proving herself." He looked startled by the bluntness. I lowered my voice. "Ryan, has she shown you the actual financial records?" His silence answered immediately. "She says things will stabilize after expansion. Expansion with what money she believes investors are coming." I studied his face. "You really trust Brandon?" Ryan hesitated. And that hesitation mattered more than words. Before he could answer, Brandon suddenly appeared beside us again. "There you are," he said smoothly to me. Then he lowered his voice slightly. "The Seattle group is here. Claire really hopes you'll reconsider tonight." I stared at him. "You mean before anyone notices this business is bleeding money?" His expression hardened almost invisibly. "You're allowing fear to cloud your judgment." "No," I answered quietly. "I'm allowing experience to guide it." He leaned slightly closer. "Do you have any idea how many women would kill for the opportunity Claire has right now?" I met his eyes steadily. "Do you have any idea how many people lose everything chasing appearances?" For the first time, genuine irritation flashed across his face. Then Claire approached us quickly. "What's happening?" "Your mother is being cautious again," Brandon said lightly. Cautious. Such a polite word for inconvenient. Claire looked exhausted beneath her makeup. Dark circles hid beneath her eyes despite careful concealer. Her smile seemed stretched too tightly. "Mom!" she whispered sharply. "Please don't sabotage this night." That word hit me hard. Sabotage. As though refusing to gamble my house made me destructive. I looked around the crowded boutique again. At the expensive flowers, the champagne, the music, the people taking photographs beside displays bought with borrowed money. And suddenly, I saw everything clearly. This wasn't success, it was performance. A beautiful performance balanced over panic. Then Brandon quietly removed a folder from beneath the counter and placed it near me. "Just signatures," he said calmly. "Then Claire can finally move forward." I stared at the folder without touching it. Around us, guests laughed and clinked champagne glasses while soft jazz floated through the air. Claire looked at me desperately. Not emotionally desperate, financially desperate, and something inside me finally broke free. "No," I said softly. Claire blinked. "What, I'm not signing anything?" "Mom, no." Her face flushed instantly. "You're doing this now? I'm protecting myself. You're humiliating me." I looked at her in disbelief. "Claire, this isn't about embarrassment anymore." "Yes, it is," she snapped loudly. Nearby conversations quieted slightly. People started glancing toward us. Brandon immediately stepped back, letting Claire explode while keeping his own hands clean. "You said you believed in me," Claire shouted, her voice trembling. "You had one chance to prove it." I felt every eye in the room turning toward us now. And then she said the sentence that would replay in my mind for months afterward. "You ruined my future mom." Silence swallowed the boutique. Champagne glasses froze halfway to mouths. Music still played softly overhead, somehow making everything worse. I stared at my daughter. My beautiful little girl who once made dresses for dolls from old curtains. The child I spent my entire life protecting. And standing there beneath golden lights surrounded by strangers, she looked at me like I was the enemy. Not Brandon, not the debt, not the lies. Me. Something strange happened then. I stopped feeling the urge to defend myself. I stopped needing the room to understand my side. I simply felt tired. Deeply tired. Slowly, I placed my untouched champagne glass on the counter. Then I looked directly at Claire one final time. I hope someday you understand the difference between love and obedience, I said quietly. And before she could answer, I turned and walked out into the cold Portland rain. By the time I reached my car, I already knew what I was going to do the next morning. I was done funding Luna and Lace. I barely slept after the VIP launch. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Claire's voice again. You ruined my future mom. Not said in sadness. Said in blame. Like I had personally destroyed something sacred. By 4 a.m, I gave up trying to rest and walked into the kitchen wearing Robert's old flannel robe over my pajamas. The house was dark, except for the small light above the stove. Rain still tapped softly against the windows. Portland never seemed to run out of rain when people were heartbroken. I stood at the sink, staring into the backyard for a long time before making coffee. My hands trembled slightly while I poured it. Not from anger, from grief. Because there's a specific kind of pain that comes when your child no longer sees your love clearly. I sat at the kitchen table with Robert's photograph beside me and finally allowed myself to say the truth out loud. She's using me. The words felt ugly in my mouth, not because they were cruel, because I had spent months refusing to admit them. I stared at Robert's picture. You would know what to do, I whispered. But of course, dead husbands don't answer. At 7:30 that morning, I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. The screen glowed cold and blue against the dim kitchen. Automatic transfers, monthly support payments, marketing installments, software subscriptions, inventory assistance. For nearly a year, money had flowed quietly out of my account and into Luna and Lace like blood, leaving a wound too slowly to notice until weakness finally arrived. I hovered my cursor over the cancellation options and hesitated because mothers are trained to feel guilty for protecting themselves. A voice inside me whispered, "What if this destroys her?" But another voice answered immediately, "What if continuing destroys you?" Slowly, I canceled every automatic payment tied to the boutique, one by one, the rent assistance, the marketing support, the inventory reserve transfers. Each cancellation felt less like revenge and more like removing life support from something already dying. By the time I finished, my chest hurt so badly, I had to sit back and close my eyes. Then, I drafted an email to Claire. I rewrote it 7 times. The first version sounded too angry. The second sounded too apologetic. The third sounded like a woman begging her daughter not to hate her. Eventually, I forced myself to write the truth instead. Not cruel, not dramatic. Just clear. I informed Claire that I would no longer provide financial support for Luna and Lace until full accounting records were reviewed and explained. I requested documentation related to Cole Creative Group. And finally, I wrote the sentence that took me the longest to type. I love you deeply, but love cannot survive where transparency and respect no longer exist. My finger hovered over the send button for almost a full minute. Then, I pressed it. The response came less than 15 minutes later. Not an email, a phone call. Claire's name flashed across my screen again and again. I didn't answer. The calls kept coming. 6 calls, then 8, then 12. Finally, a voicemail notification appeared. I listened to the message while staring at the rain outside. "Mom, what are you doing?" Claire's voice cracked with panic. "You can't just pull funding overnight. Payroll is due next week. We already committed to inventory orders. Not are you okay? Not can we talk? Only money." Another voicemail arrived 20 minutes later. This time, she sounded furious. "This is unbelievable. Brandon said you might panic after last night, but I defended you." "Defended me? As if I should be grateful." "You're punishing me because I embarrassed you," she snapped. "Do you understand how selfish this is? Selfish?" The word echoed painfully through the kitchen. I looked around the little house Robert and I spent decades building together. The worn hardwood floors, the faded curtains, the coffee stain on the counter Robert always promised to sand out someday. I had sacrificed vacations, comfort savings, and peace for Claire's future. And somehow, protecting what remained of my life had become selfish. Around noon, someone knocked on my front door. I already knew who it was before opening it. Ryan Parker stood there in a gray raincoat with wet hair and tired eyes. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I stepped aside without answering. Ryan had always been polite, soft-spoken, thoughtful. I used to think he balanced Claire well. Now I wondered if he simply avoided conflict because he feared losing her. He sat at the kitchen table while I made coffee neither of us really wanted. Finally, he spoke. "She's falling apart." I stayed silent. Ryan rubbed both hands over his face. Claire barely slept. "She's terrified." "Terrified of losing the business," I said quietly. His silence confirmed it. I set his coffee down carefully. "Ryan, has she shown you the real financial situation yet? She says things are temporary." "That's not what I asked." He exhaled heavily. "No." I nodded slowly. "That's what scares me." Ryan looked genuinely conflicted. "She really believes this expansion could change her life." I sat across from him. "And what if it destroys it instead?" He didn't answer immediately. Rain tapped softly against the windows, while the kitchen clock ticked loudly in the silence between us. Finally, he spoke again. "Brandon thinks the business can still recover if the Seattle investors stay interested." "Do you trust Brandon?" Ryan hesitated too long. That hesitation told me more than words could. I walked to the counter and returned with a folder containing copied invoices Susan helped me organize the night before. I slid several pages toward him. Ryan frowned while reading. "Cole Creative Group?" he asked. "Brandon's company." His eyes widened slightly. "He's paying himself from Luna and Lace repeatedly." Ryan kept flipping through the pages. The deeper he read, the paler he became. "These consulting fees are insane." "Yes. And Claire approved all this?" "I think Claire approved whatever Brandon told her was necessary." Ryan leaned back heavily in his chair. For the first time since entering my house, he looked genuinely afraid. "She never showed me these, because I don't think she wanted to look too closely herself." He stared at the paperwork for a long time, then quietly asked the question I'd been asking myself for weeks. "Do you think he's manipulating her?" I answered honestly. "I think he found someone desperate to prove she mattered." Ryan lowered his eyes. That answer hurt him because he knew it was true. Before either of us could speak again, my phone buzzed with another incoming call from Claire. Ryan glanced toward it. "Aren't you going to answer?" I looked at the screen, then slowly turned the phone face down again. "If I hear her cry right now," I admitted softly, "I might give her everything she wants." Ryan's expression changed then. Not judgment, understanding. Because maybe for the first time he realized this wasn't just about money. It was about survival. Later that evening, after Ryan left, I made the mistake of opening social media. Claire had posted a photograph from the VIP launch. She looked beautiful beneath the boutique lights, confident, elegant, successful. The caption beneath the photo read, "Sometimes the people closest to you become the ones most afraid of your growth." Hundreds of comments flooded underneath. "Protect your energy. People hate ambitious women. Keep chasing your dream. So proud of you." My chest tightened painfully. Strangers who knew nothing about our lives were cheering, while my daughter quietly painted me as the villain. I closed the app immediately. Then I sat alone in the dark living room while rain whispered against the roof. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I stopped asking myself whether Claire would forgive me. Instead, I asked something far more important. Would I survive if I kept sacrificing myself to save her? 3 days after I stopped funding Luna and Lace, Ryan called me again. This time, his voice sounded different. Not defensive, not cautious. Worried. "Can we meet somewhere?" he asked quietly. "Not at the boutique." An hour later, we sat inside a small coffee shop on the east side of Portland where nobody knew us. Rain streaked down the windows while people worked quietly on laptops around us. Ryan looked exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he kept rubbing his jaw like he hadn't slept properly in days. He slid into the booth across from me and immediately lowered his voice. "You were right." The words didn't bring satisfaction, only dread. Ryan pulled a folded stack of papers from his coat pocket and placed them carefully on the table between us. I started looking through the business accounts after our conversation. My stomach tightened. And he laughed bitterly. "I don't think Claire even knows how bad this is." I stared at him carefully. "What did you find?" Ryan unfolded the papers slowly. Credit card balances, vendor invoices, advertising contracts, shipping delays, outstanding payment notices. The numbers blurred together until my chest began aching again. "She owes this much," I whispered. Ryan nodded grimly. "And that's only what I could access." I looked through the documents with trembling fingers. Several balances were already overdue. Interest charges had started appearing. Minimum payments were getting larger each month. And woven throughout everything were more charges connected to Cole Creative Group. "Claire told me investors were coming," Ryan muttered. "But there's no actual signed investment agreement anywhere." A cold chill moved through me. Then what exactly has Brandon been promising her? Ryan looked away. Hope. That word sat heavily between us. Because hope becomes dangerous when desperate people mistake it for certainty. Ryan rubbed both hands over his face. "She keeps saying one big breakthrough will fix everything." I swallowed hard. That's how people drown financially. They keep believing the next month will save them. He stared at the paperwork. "I don't think Claire even sees reality anymore." The sentence hurt because I knew it was true. My daughter had stopped building a business months ago. She was chasing an identity, an image, proof that she mattered. And Brandon had learned exactly how to feed that hunger. Ryan slid another document toward me. This bothered me the most. I looked down. A contract between Luna and Lace and Cole Creative Group. The compensation structure made my stomach turn. Brandon received percentages tied to marketing growth, expansion spending, vendor scaling, and luxury positioning initiatives. The more Claire spent, the more Brandon earned. "Oh my God," I whispered. Ryan nodded once. He profits from convincing her to spend money she doesn't have. I leaned back slowly, suddenly feeling nauseated. Every expensive floral arrangement, every influencer package, every luxury rebrand, every expansion conversation. Brandon wasn't guiding Claire towards stability. He was monetizing her insecurity. And somehow, that realization hurt worse than the financial damage itself, because it meant Claire wasn't only reckless, she was vulnerable. Ryan looked at me carefully. She worships him professionally. I closed my eyes briefly. I know. She thinks he sees potential in her. He sees opportunity. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The coffee shop hummed quietly around us while rain slid down the glass outside. Finally, Ryan said something that surprised me. I think she's scared to admit she made a mistake. I looked at him. What do you mean? She's already sacrificed so much emotionally for this business. If she admits Brandon manipulated her? He exhaled shakily. Then she has to face how much damage she caused too. That hit me deeply because it explained something I'd been struggling to understand. Why Claire defended Brandon even when the numbers stopped making sense. Because admitting the truth wouldn't only expose him, it would expose her own choices, her own pride, her own cruelty. Later that afternoon, Susan came over again to help organize more financial records. Ryan had emailed copies of several contracts he secretly downloaded from Claire's shared business folders. Susan adjusted her reading glasses while scanning the paperwork. Well, she muttered darkly. This is uglier than I expected. I sat beside her at the kitchen table. Can Brandon legally do this? Some of it probably. Some of it, she frowned harder, feels intentionally predatory. She pointed at several clauses buried inside the contracts. Look at this language. I leaned closer. The wording was complicated, but the meaning became horrifyingly clear once Susan explained it. Brandon's company received financial incentives not based on profits, but on spending growth. He gets rewarded whether the boutique succeeds or not, I whispered. Exactly. Susan tapped another section. And here's the really dangerous part. The contract tied future strategic control recommendations to debt restructuring if Luna and Lace became financially unstable. I looked at her blankly. What does that mean? It means if Claire sinks deep enough into debt, Brandon positions himself as the solution. A sick feeling crawled through my stomach, like watching puzzle pieces locked together into something monstrous. He's trapping her, I whispered. Susan didn't answer immediately, then quietly said, Yes. That evening, something unexpected happened. A young woman knocked on my front door. She looked nervous, standing there beneath the porch light, clutching her purse tightly against her chest. Mrs. Mason. Yes. My name is Natalie Brooks. I used to work at Luna and Lace. I immediately stepped aside. Natalie sat stiffly on the edge of my couch while I made tea. She couldn't have been older than 24. Pretty tired looking, with nervous eyes that kept darting toward the windows. I'm sorry to show up unannounced, she said softly. But I thought you should know some things. My pulse quickened. What things? Natalie wrapped both hands around her tea mug. At first, Claire was amazing to work for. The sentence nearly broke my heart before the real conversation even began. At first, I asked quietly. Natalie nodded sadly. She cared about the clothes, about customers, about local artists. Her eyes lowered. Then Brandon started controlling everything. What do you mean by controlling? He pushed Claire to fake demand. I frowned. Fake demand? Natalie nodded. We'd post sold-out announcements even when inventory barely moved. A cold silence filled the room. He made us create waiting lists for products that weren't actually selling. I stared at her. Why to make the brand look exclusive? The room suddenly felt smaller. He also pressured Claire into huge inventory orders before major promotions, Natalie continued. Way more than the store could realistically move. Susan exchanged a grim look with me. Natalie hesitated again, before speaking more softly. There were times employees got paid late. My stomach dropped. What, only by a few days at first? Claire always apologized. Natalie looked genuinely sad. I don't think she wanted to become this person. That sentence hurt more than anger would have. Because deep down, I still wanted to believe my daughter wasn't cruel. Just lost. Natalie continued quietly. Toward the end, Claire started noticing things too. I looked up quickly. What kind of things? She questioned some marketing invoices once. Brandon got really defensive. Natalie swallowed hard. After that, she stopped asking questions. Because asking questions would force her to confront reality. And reality was terrifying. I rubbed my forehead slowly, so she knew something was wrong. Natalie nodded reluctantly. I think part of her knew. But she was too deep into everything by then. Too deep financially. Too deep emotionally. Too deep publicly. Because once someone builds their identity around appearing successful, failure starts feeling like death. Before leaving, Natalie paused near my front door. I know Claire hurt you, she said softly. But I honestly think she's drowning. After she left, silence settled heavily through the house again. Susan gathered the paperwork quietly while I stared out into the dark, rainy street. Finally, she spoke. What are you thinking? I answered honestly. I think my daughter became both victim and accomplice at the same time. Susan nodded slowly. That happens more often than people realize. I looked down at the growing stack of evidence covering my coffee table. Contracts, invoices, debt notices, false marketing strategies, manipulation hidden behind business language. And somewhere beneath all of it, my little girl, the child who once made dresses from old curtains, the woman now destroying herself trying to look successful enough for people who would abandon her the second the money disappeared. That night, I finally understood something painful. If I kept rescuing Claire financially, I wouldn't actually be saving her. I'd be helping Brandon keep control over her even longer. 5 days after Natalie visited my house, Claire finally came to see me. Not alone. The moment I saw Brandon Cole stepping out of the passenger side of Ryan's SUV behind her, a cold heaviness settled into my chest. It was a gray Sunday afternoon, the kind where Portland skies hang low enough to make the whole city feel tired. Fallen leaves clung wetly to the sidewalk outside my house, while wind rattled the maple tree near the porch. Claire climbed the front steps first. She looked thinner, paler. Her eyes were swollen like she hadn't slept properly in days. For one dangerous second, my maternal instinct surged forward so strongly, I almost forgot everything else. I almost opened my arms and pulled her against me the way I used to when she scraped her knees as a little girl. But then Brandon stepped beside her carrying a leather folder under his arm, and reality returned immediately. I opened the front door without smiling. Come in. Claire walked inside quietly while Brandon followed behind her like a lawyer entering a negotiation. Not family, business. Always business now. I led them into the living room. Robert's old fireplace crackled softly while rain tapped against the windows. The room suddenly felt too small for all the tension they carried inside with them. Claire sat first. Brandon remained standing for a moment, scanning the room casually before finally taking a seat beside her. Not behind her. Beside her. As though they were partners in something larger than either of them wanted to admit. I folded my hands together calmly. What's this about? Claire looked at Brandon briefly before answering. That glance hurt more than I expected. I just want to fix things, she said quietly. The sentence sounded rehearsed. Brandon slid the leather folder onto the coffee table. We've prepared documentation that protects everyone moving forward. Protects everyone. I didn't touch the folder. What kind of documentation? Claire swallowed nervously. It just clarifies that the money you gave Luna and Lace was financial support, not ownership or operational leverage. I stared at her slowly. Operational leverage? Brandon immediately stepped in smoothly. Diana, tensions have escalated emotionally. This paperwork simply creates healthier boundaries between family and business. I almost laughed at the irony. Healthy boundaries. Coming from the man who had helped turn my daughter against me. I opened the folder carefully. The legal language twisted across multiple pages, but the meaning became clear almost immediately. If I signed, I would formally acknowledge that every dollar I gave Claire had been a personal gift, with no expectation of repayment, accountability, or financial transparency. And even worse, there were clauses limiting my ability to challenge business decisions or question financial management moving forward. I looked up slowly. You want me to surrender any right to question where my money went? Brandon's smile stayed perfectly controlled. We want to avoid toxic misunderstandings. Toxic. That word again. Anything inconvenient had suddenly become toxic. I closed the folder carefully. No. Claire's face tightened instantly. You didn't even read all of it. I read enough. Her breathing sharpened. Mom, this constant suspicion is destroying everything. I stared at her. No, Claire. The lies are destroying everything. Brandon leaned forward calmly. With respect, Diana, your emotional attachment to the funding is impairing Claire's ability to grow independently. I looked directly at him. My emotional attachment? Yes. I nodded slowly. You mean the emotional attachment of a widow who used her dead husband's insurance money to support her daughter? For the first time, Brandon didn't immediately answer. Claire rubbed both hands over her face. Can we please stop making this about Dad? The sentence sliced through me. Because Robert should have mattered. His sacrifices should have mattered. His memory should have mattered. Instead, she spoke about him like he was an inconvenience interrupting her ambition. I sat back slowly. Then let's make it about facts. I reached beside my chair and lifted the folder Susan helped me prepare. Invoices, contracts, payment histories. I placed several papers onto the coffee table between us. Claire frowned immediately. What's this documentation? Brandon's eyes narrowed almost invisibly the moment he recognized the invoices from Cole Creative Group. I watched his face carefully. There it was. Fear. Small. Controlled, but real. I pointed toward the paperwork. Would you like to explain why your consulting company has been receiving thousands of dollars from Luna and Lace every month? Claire blinked rapidly. What Brandon answered too quickly. My fees are standard. That's not what I asked. Claire grabbed the invoices with shaking hands. As she flipped through them, confusion slowly spread across her face. I knew you were consulting, she said softly to Brandon. But I didn't realize. You approved every payment, he interrupted smoothly. Her eyes moved rapidly over the numbers. But these percentages? Brandon leaned back calmly. Luxury branding requires intensive strategy work. I looked at Claire carefully. Did you know his compensation increased when spending increased silence? Claire looked at Brandon again. For the first time in months, uncertainty appeared in her eyes when she looked at him. And Brandon noticed it immediately. His entire tone shifted softer. Claire, don't let fear distort perspective. Fear again. Always fear. That was his favorite weapon. Any concern became fear. Any caution became limitation. Any accountability became negativity. I leaned forward slowly. You encouraged her to spend money she didn't have because you profited every time she did. That's an unfair simplification. Is it? Claire looked trapped between us now. Her breathing had become uneven. I trusted you, she whispered to Brandon. And you were right to. I almost pitied him then, because even cornered, he still sounded convincing. That's what manipulators do best. They remain calm, while everyone else drowns emotionally. Claire suddenly looked at me. You went through our accounts. The accusation in her voice stunned me. Not is this true? Not oh my God. Only betrayal that I investigated at all. Yes, I answered quietly, because I was terrified. You had no right. I stared at her in disbelief. No right. You stopped funding the business without warning? After you publicly humiliated me? You embarrassed me first. I blinked slowly. How by acting like I was irresponsible in front of investors. Something inside me cracked then. Not loudly, quietly. The way old wood finally splits after years under pressure. I looked at my daughter sitting beside the man draining money from her business, while still defending him more fiercely than she defended herself. And suddenly, I understood something devastating. Claire wasn't ready to face the truth yet, because the truth would destroy the fantasy she built her entire identity around. Brandon rose calmly from the couch. This conversation is becoming emotionally unproductive. I almost laughed again. Emotionally unproductive. What a polished way to describe a family collapsing. Then Claire said the sentence that hurt more than anything else she'd said so far. Dad would have believed in me. The room went completely still. Rain whispered against the windows. Fire crackled softly behind me. And for one horrible second, I genuinely couldn't breathe. Because Robert wasn't here to defend himself. Wasn't here to tell her how many nights he worked overtime building cabinets to help pay for her college tuition. Wasn't here to remind her he believed in dreams, but not recklessness. Claire's eyes filled with tears immediately after saying it. I think part of her knew she'd gone too far. But pain and pride make people cruel sometimes. I looked at her quietly. No, sweetheart, I said softly. Your father would have believed in you. Tears slipped down her face. But he would never have let you destroy yourself to impress people who profit from your insecurity. Brandon stiffened immediately. Claire stood abruptly from the couch. You're twisting everything? No, I answered quietly. I'm finally seeing everything clearly. For a moment I thought she might stay, might break down, might finally let herself admit she was scared. But instead, she grabbed her coat. Brandon followed immediately behind her. At the front door, Claire turned back toward me one final time. Her face looked shattered beneath all the anger. But she still chose him, still chose the illusion. You're making the biggest mistake of your life, she whispered. Then she walked out into the rain beside Brandon Cole. And as I stood alone in the doorway, watching their taillights disappear down the wet Portland street, I realized something heartbreaking. Sometimes people cling to the person destroying them because admitting the truth feels even more terrifying than the destruction itself. After Claire left my house with Brandon that night, I didn't cry immediately. I think shock delayed it. I stood in the doorway long after their car disappeared, listening to rainwater drip from the porch roof, while cold wind slipped through the open screen door. Dad would have believed in me. The sentence kept replaying inside my head, like a bruise pressed over and over again. Eventually, I closed the door, locked it, and leaned my forehead against the wood. Robert had been dead for 4 years, and somehow, even now, I still felt protective of him. protective of his memory, protective of the kind of man he really was. Claire had used his absence like a weapon because dead people can't correct the stories others tell about them. But I knew Robert better than anyone, and I knew exactly what would have terrified him about this situation. Not Claire's ambition, her desperation. Around midnight, unable to sleep, I wandered into our old bedroom. Most of Robert's clothes were gone now. I donated them gradually after the first year because seeing them untouched every day felt unbearable. But some things remained. His watch on the dresser, his wedding band inside the small ceramic bowl beside the bed, and beneath the closet shelf, the cedar box. I hadn't opened it in months. Robert built that box himself one winter during a week of heavy storms. Smooth cedar wood, brass hinges, careful corners, sanded perfectly by hand. Important things deserve proper places, he used to say. I carried the box to the bed and opened it slowly. Photographs, insurance papers, old anniversary cards, letters. Robert wrote letters constantly after his heart problems started getting worse. Not dramatic goodbye letters, just thoughts he didn't want left unsaid in case time ran out before conversations happened naturally. Most of them were for me. A few were for Claire. My fingers froze when I spotted one envelope with her name written across the front in Robert's careful handwriting. For Claire when she needs this. A strange chill moved through me. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. The paper inside smelled faintly like cedar and old cologne. Claire, if you're reading this, then life probably became heavier than I hoped it would for you. First, I need you to know something clearly. I have always believed in you, not because of what you might achieve someday, because of who you already are. I smiled sadly through sudden tears. That sounded exactly like Robert, always loving people before they earned anything. The letter continued. You always dreamed bigger than most people? That's a beautiful thing. But dreams can become dangerous when they start depending on applause to survive. Don't let anyone convince you that your worth depends on looking successful. I pressed my hand against my mouth because even years before his death, he had seen it. That hunger inside her. The craving to prove herself. The letter continued for several pages. Robert wrote about mistakes he made when he was younger, about taking jobs he hated because he wanted to look successful in front of other people, about how easy it was to lose yourself chasing approval. Then near the end came the paragraph that shattered me completely. Your mother loves so deeply that she sometimes forgets she deserves protecting too. Please don't build a future that costs her peace, dignity, or safety. A dream should never require the destruction of the people who love you most. I broke then, completely, not delicate tears. Real grief, the kind that bends your body forward because the weight inside your chest suddenly becomes too heavy to carry upright. I cried for Robert, for Claire, for myself, and for the horrifying realization that the man I lost had understood our daughter more clearly than I ever had. The next morning, Susan arrived to check on me and found me sitting at the kitchen table, still holding the letter. She read it silently while I drank untouched coffee beside her. When she finished, her eyes softened immediately. He loved you both very much. Yes. And he was wise. I stared down at the letter again. I don't know whether to show this to Claire. Susan considered that carefully. If you give it to her now, she may think you're using her father emotionally. That thought hurt because I knew Susan was right. Claire wasn't ready to hear truth yet. Not from me. Maybe not even from Robert. Later that afternoon, Susan convinced me to finally speak with an attorney. At this point, she said firmly, this isn't just emotional anymore. It's legal. Part of me hated that. I didn't want lawyers involved. I wanted my daughter back. But love without boundaries had already nearly destroyed me once. I agreed to meet with Amanda Reynolds the following morning. Amanda's office overlooked downtown Portland from the 5th floor of an older brick building. She looked to be in her late 40s, sharp-eyed but calm, with silver streaks in her dark hair, and the kind of steady voice that immediately made people trust her. After hearing the entire situation, she spent nearly an hour reviewing the documents Susan and I brought. Her expression became more serious with every page. Finally, she removed her glasses slowly. "Mrs. Mason," she said carefully, "you've done the right thing by stopping financial support." The validation nearly made me cry again. Amanda organized several invoices into neat piles. "These consulting structures are highly questionable." "Illegal?" I asked. "Possibly exploitative. Maybe worse, depending on intent." She paused while reviewing another contract, then suddenly frowned. "That's strange." My stomach tightened. Amanda slid one document toward me. "Did you sign this?" I looked down. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. Then I saw my signature near the bottom of the page. My blood went cold. "No." Amanda looked at me carefully. "You're certain I've never seen this document before?" Susan leaned forward sharply. "What is it?" Amanda's voice remained calm, but serious. "A supplemental authorization tied to financial liability expansion?" I blinked. "I don't even know what that means." "It means this document potentially broadens your financial exposure connected to Luna and Lace." The room tilted slightly around me. I stared at the signature again. It looked like mine, almost perfectly, but not perfectly enough. The curve on the M was wrong, too sharp, too careful, like someone copying instead of naturally writing. Amanda's eyes narrowed slightly. "There's a strong possibility this signature was reproduced from another source." My throat tightened painfully. "You mean forged? I'm saying it requires investigation?" Susan looked furious now. Oh my God, but I couldn't speak, because one terrifying question had swallowed everything else. "Who did it? Brandon or Claire?" Amanda seemed to read the panic on my face immediately. "Don't jump to conclusions yet," she said carefully. "There are multiple ways signatures get reused improperly in business settings." But her calmness couldn't erase the fear crawling through me. Because whether Claire participated directly or not, my daughter was now standing beside people capable of destroying my financial safety completely. Amanda gathered the papers neatly. "From this point forward, I strongly recommend all communication happen in writing whenever possible." I nodded numbly, then quietly asked the question haunting me most. "If Claire comes back asking for help, what do I do?" Amanda studied me for a long moment before answering. "You separate helping your daughter from financing her decisions." Simple words, almost impossible to live. When I returned home later that evening, rain had finally stopped for the first time in days. Pale sunlight slipped weakly through the clouds, illuminating the wet streets outside. I sat alone at the kitchen table again, Robert's letter beside me. "Your mother loves so deeply that she sometimes forgets she deserves protecting too." For years, I believed protecting Claire meant sacrificing myself. Now, for the first time in my life, I was beginning to understand something different. Maybe protecting my daughter also meant refusing to let her become the kind of person who destroyed the people who loved her most. The collapse of Luna and Lace didn't happen all at once. That's the thing people misunderstand about disaster. Most lives don't explode dramatically in a single moment. They leak apart slowly, quietly, until one day there's nothing left holding the structure up. About a week after my meeting with Amanda Reynolds, the first public cracks began appearing. I was standing behind the counter at Sweet Maple Cafe when my phone buzzed with a text from Susan. Check Instagram. My stomach tightened immediately. I stepped into the storage room before opening the app. An influencer Claire had paid for promotion posted a story complaining about unprofessional business practices and delayed payments from a Portland boutique. No store name was mentioned. But the comments already guessed Luna and Lace within minutes. I leaned against a shelf of flour bags while dread crawled slowly through my chest. By lunchtime, 2 more complaints appeared online. A local jewelry artist claimed the boutique hadn't paid her final invoice. Another woman posted about delayed shipping refunds. The comments multiplied rapidly. What happened to Luna and Lace? I thought this brand was luxury. I heard employees weren't getting paid on time. The internet smelled blood, and once online rumors begin, they spread faster than truth ever can. That evening, Ryan called me. He sounded exhausted. It's getting worse. I closed my eyes. What happened now? 2 employees threatened to quit. My chest tightened. Because of payroll, yes. I sat slowly at my kitchen table. Where's Claire? At the boutique. She's trying to hold everything together. His voice cracked slightly on the last sentence. I suddenly pictured my daughter alone inside that beautiful store, surrounded by unpaid invoices and collapsing illusions. And despite everything, part of me still wanted to drive there immediately and save her. Mothers don't stop loving their children just because their children hurt them. That's what makes boundaries so painful. She still thinks Brandon can fix this, Ryan whispered. I stared silently out the kitchen window. Rain slid slowly down the glass. Do you? I finally asked. Ryan didn't answer immediately, then quietly said, No. The next afternoon, Ryan came to my house carrying his laptop. He looked pale, more serious than I'd ever seen him. I found something, he said. We sat together in the living room while he opened several emails on the screen. These were in one of Brandon's archived folders. I leaned forward slowly. The email chain began between Brandon and an investor group in Seattle. At first, it looked like ordinary business discussion. Then I reached one sentence that made my stomach turn. Claire is emotionally easy to steer once she believes expansion equals validation. I covered my mouth instantly. Ryan's jaw tightened. There's more. Another email discussed restructuring opportunities if Luna and Lace became financially unstable. One sentence stood out like poison on the screen. If debt pressure increases, ownership leverage becomes significantly easier. My pulse began pounding painfully. He planned this? I whispered. Ryan nodded grimly. I think he always intended to position himself for control, not help. Control? The realization made me physically cold. Brandon hadn't simply manipulated Claire emotionally, he had studied her weaknesses professionally. He saw her hunger to feel important and built an entire financial trap around it. Ryan rubbed both hands over his face. She trusted him completely. She wanted someone to tell her she was extraordinary. The words came out softer than I expected, because suddenly my anger toward Claire felt tangled together with unbearable sadness. How lonely must my daughter have been inside herself, to mistake exploitation for belief. Before either of us could speak again, my phone rang. Claire! I stared at the screen while fear twisted through me. Ryan looked up immediately. Aren't you going to answer? This time I did. Hello. For several seconds, I heard nothing except breathing. Then Claire spoke. And immediately, I knew something had shattered. Mom? Her voice sounded hollow, small, not angry anymore, terrified. What happened? I asked softly. Silence. Then I think Brandon lied to me. My chest tightened painfully. Where are you? At the boutique. I'm coming. but before I could grab my coat, Amanda's warning echoed sharply in my head. Protect evidence first, not emotions. I forced myself to stop moving. Claire, I said carefully, listen to me. Do not delete anything. Do not sign anything. Do you understand? She sounded close to tears. He changed passwords. What? The website, the advertising accounts, some supplier portals. Her breathing became shaky. I can't access half the business systems anymore. Ryan stood immediately. Oh my God. Claire kept talking rapidly now, panic spilling through every word. He said it was temporary while restructuring finances, but now vendors are calling me directly, and I can't even see all the account details. My stomach turned. Where is Brandon right now? I don't know. That answer terrified me more than anything else, because manipulators disappear the moment accountability arrives. Claire, I said firmly, you need to leave the boutique and go home. No, she cried instantly. I can still fix this. There it was again. That desperate need to believe collapse could still become success if she just held on long enough. Claire, I already lost everything because of this business. The sentence echoed through the phone painfully. Then came the quieter truth beneath it. I can't let it all be for nothing. My eyes filled with tears immediately, because finally, I heard the real emotion underneath all the arrogance and blame. Shame. She wasn't just fighting for the boutique anymore. She was fighting against the humiliation of admitting she'd been wrong. Ryan gently took the phone from my hand. Claire, listen to me, he said firmly. You need to stop protecting Brandon. Long silence. Then Claire whispered something that nearly broke me. I don't know how. Ryan closed his eyes briefly. And suddenly I saw clearly how emotional manipulation works. Not through force, through dependency. Brandon convinced Claire that he understood her better than anyone else, that he alone could guide her toward the successful identity she craved. And once someone ties their self-worth to another person's approval, walking away starts feeling like emotional death. That night, Ryan left to find Claire while I stayed home waiting for updates. The hours crawled slowly. At nearly midnight, my phone rang again. Ryan sounded furious. He had transfer documents ready. Cold fear spread instantly through my body. What kind of transfer documents brand ownership contingencies tied to debt restructuring? I closed my eyes. He was going to take Luna and Lace. Yes. Not eventually. Not hypothetically. Soon. Ryan exhaled harshly. Claire found copies hidden in Brandon's office drawer. I sat down heavily on the couch. For months, Claire believed Brandon was helping her build a future. In reality, he had been positioning himself to own the ruins after she collapsed financially enough to surrender control. A sob caught painfully in my throat before I could stop it. Not because the boutique was failing, because my daughter had trusted the wrong person so completely that she almost handed him her entire life. Where's Claire now? I whispered. At home. Is she okay? Ryan hesitated too long. No. That single word held more truth than everything else. No, she wasn't okay. The boutique was collapsing publicly. Debt was swallowing her. Employees were leaving. Vendors were angry. Social media rumors spread hourly. And now, the man she defended against her own mother had finally revealed what he truly was. A predator, wearing confidence like cologne. Late that night, after hanging up, I walked into my bedroom and opened Robert's cedar box again. I reread his letter slowly beneath the dim bedside lamp. A dream should never require the destruction of the people who love you most. Tears slipped quietly down my face. Because Robert had been right, and because somewhere across Portland, my daughter was finally beginning to understand it too. Amanda Reynolds scheduled the meeting for Thursday morning. Everyone needs to be in the same room, she told me firmly over the phone. No more confusion, no more emotional storytelling, just facts. Facts. I used to believe facts solved things cleanly. But when families break apart, facts don't arrive quietly. They arrive carrying shame, grief, regret, and ruined trust behind them. Rain poured heavily over Portland the morning of the meeting. The streets downtown glistened silver beneath low gray clouds, while traffic crawled slowly through the wet city. I arrived early because I couldn't bear sitting alone at home waiting. Amanda's office smelled faintly like coffee and old paper. Large windows overlooked the city skyline, blurred by rainwater sliding down the glass. Susan sat beside me in the conference room while Amanda organized folders at the end of the long wooden table. "You okay?" Susan whispered. "No." She squeezed my hand once. "That means you're still human." A few minutes later, Ryan arrived with Claire. The moment I saw my daughter, my heart cracked all over again. She looked exhausted, not polished, not glamorous, not like the confident boutique owner from social media. She looked like someone who hadn't slept in days. Her hair was pulled back carelessly. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her oversized sweater hung loosely on her frame, like she'd lost weight too quickly. For the first time in months, she looked young again, not in age, in vulnerability. Claire froze briefly when she saw me sitting there, then lowered her eyes immediately. "Hi, Mom." The words came quietly, carefully, not warm yet, but no longer hostile either. "Hi, sweetheart." That single word almost made her cry instantly. I saw it happen in her face before she looked away quickly. Ryan guided her gently toward the chairs across from us. Nobody spoke while Amanda finished organizing the paperwork. Then the conference room door opened again. Brandon Cole walked in wearing a charcoal coat and carrying himself with the same polished confidence he always used. But this time, I noticed something different. Tension. Small, controlled, but present. Amanda stood immediately. "Mr. Cole, please have a seat." Brandon smiled smoothly, always happy to resolve misunderstandings professionally. Misunderstandings. Even now, he spoke like this was all unfortunate confusion instead of emotional destruction. Claire didn't look at him. That mattered. Amanda remained standing while the room settled into silence. "Before we begin," she said calmly, "I want everyone to understand the purpose of this meeting." She placed both hands lightly against the conference table. "This is not about emotional blame. It is about financial clarity and legal accountability." Brandon leaned back comfortably. "Of course." Amanda opened the first folder. Over the past year, Luna and Lace transferred substantial funds to Cole Creative Group. She began sliding copies of invoices across the table one by one. Marketing consultation fees, expansion strategy retainers, luxury positioning percentages, vendor scaling incentives. The stack kept growing. Claire stared down at the paper silently while color slowly drained from her face. Amanda continued. These agreements created a compensation structure where Mr. Cole financially benefited from increased spending regardless of business profitability. Brandon folded his hands calmly. "That's standard consulting practice in certain industries." Amanda didn't even glance up. "For multinational firms, perhaps? Not typically for financially unstable small businesses dependent on family-funded liquidity." The calm precision in her voice cut sharper than yelling ever could. Brandon's jaw tightened slightly. Claire finally spoke. "You never explained the percentages to me." He turned toward her immediately. "You approved every contract. I trusted you. You were responsible for reading what you signed. The coldness in his tone made me physically flinch, because suddenly the warmth he once used around Claire had vanished completely. No comfort, no reassurance, only distance. Amanda opened another folder. Additionally, we discovered correspondence discussing potential ownership leverage if Luna and Lace entered debt restructuring. Ryan slid printed email copies toward the center of the table. Brandon's expression changed the moment he recognized them. There are legal concerns regarding how these emails were obtained, he said sharply. Amanda remained perfectly calm. And there are potentially larger concerns regarding the content inside them. Silence filled the room. Claire slowly picked up one printed email with trembling hands. I watched her eyes move across the sentence. Claire is emotionally easy to steer once she believes expansion equals validation. For a second, I thought she might stop breathing. Her face crumpled instantly. "What is this?" she whispered. Brandon leaned forward immediately. "Claire, those comments were taken out of context." She looked up at him slowly. Out of context. Not untrue. Just out of context. I saw the realization hit her in real time, like glass breaking behind her eyes. Amanda continued before Brandon could regain control of the conversation. "There is also concern regarding unauthorized signature usage tied to supplemental liability documents." Brandon stiffened immediately. Amanda placed the suspicious document onto the table. "This signature appears inconsistent with Mrs. Mason's authentic signing patterns." Claire stared down at the paper in horror, then slowly looked toward Brandon. He remained calm for approximately 3 seconds too long before answering. "That document came through digital processing." Amanda's voice sharpened slightly for the first time all morning. "So you acknowledge involvement in document handling? I handled administrative processing? Yes." Susan suddenly spoke coldly beside me. "You forged her signature." Brandon immediately looked offended. "That's a reckless accusation." Amanda raised one hand calmly. "No conclusions are being made yet, but forensic review remains an available option." That sentence landed heavily, because everyone in the room understood what it meant. This situation could become criminal. Claire covered her mouth suddenly. Oh my God. Not dramatic, not performative. Real, raw, shattered. For months, she had defended Brandon against me, chosen him over me, protected his reputation over her own mother's pain. And now, she was finally seeing the full shape of the trap around her. Brandon turned toward her carefully. "Claire, listen to me. Business negotiations become messy sometimes. That doesn't mean anyone manipulated you." But his voice sounded different now, not confident, defensive. Claire stared at him like she was looking at a stranger wearing familiar skin. "You said we were building something together." "We were. You said you believed in me." "I did." "Then why were you planning for ownership leverage?" Brandon exhaled slowly. "Because I had to protect my professional interests." There it was. Not her dream, not her future. His interests. Claire's breathing became shaky again, and the emails she whispered. "The things you said about me?" Brandon's expression hardened slightly. "You were emotionally reactive throughout this entire process. I saw the exact moment my daughter's heart broke. Not when the boutique started collapsing. Not when vendors demanded money. Right there. Because she finally realized the man she defended saw her weakness as strategy, not humanity." Tears slid silently down Claire's face. And suddenly, I stopped seeing the woman who humiliated me publicly at the launch party. I saw my little girl again, lost, ashamed, terrified. Amanda closed the folder carefully. At this point, she said calmly, My recommendation is immediate financial separation between Mr. Cole and Luna and Lace, pending further review. Brandon stood abruptly. This is absurd. Amanda looked directly at him. No, Mr. Cole. What's absurd is convincing vulnerable people that exploitation is mentorship. The room went completely silent. Brandon looked around the table, at Ryan, at Susan, at Claire, then finally at me, and something ugly slipped through the polished mask for the first time. You know what your problem is, Diana? He snapped coldly. You filled her head with insecurity for years. I simply gave her ambition. I stared at him steadily. No, you gave her performance. There's a difference. His face darkened. She would have been nothing without me. Claire suddenly stood so fast, her chair nearly tipped backward. Stop! Her voice shook violently. Brandon blinked. Claire wiped tears from her face angrily. Just stop talking. The room fell silent again. Then slowly, painfully, my daughter turned toward me, and with tears still falling, she whispered the words I had waited months to hear. I'm sorry, Mom. Not dramatic, not polished, broken, real. And somehow that hurt even more than the anger ever had. Because apologies don't erase damage, they simply acknowledge it. After the meeting with Amanda Reynolds, Claire disappeared for almost 2 days. No calls, no texts, nothing. Part of me understood why. When people finally see the truth after months of denial, they often vanish for a while because shame feels unbearable in direct sunlight. Still, I worried constantly. I worried she wasn't eating. I worried she blamed herself completely. I worried she might run back to Brandon simply because humiliation can make familiar manipulation feel safer than facing reality alone. By Friday evening, rain had finally stopped over Portland. The sky remained pale and cold, but weak sunlight slipped through the clouds for the first time in what felt like weeks. I was watering the dying chrysanthemums on my front porch when I heard a car pull into the driveway. My heart immediately tightened. Claire stepped out slowly, alone. She wore no makeup. Her hair hung loose around her face, and she looked emotionally exhausted in a way I recognized instantly. Not because I'd seen it in her before, because I'd seen it in myself after Robert died. The look of someone whose entire emotional foundation had cracked open. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Claire quietly asked, "Can I come in?" I nodded immediately. The house smelled faintly like cinnamon because I'd baked muffins that morning, mostly to keep myself distracted. Claire paused in the kitchen doorway like she was seeing the room differently now. Her eyes moved slowly across everything. The old wooden cabinets Robert refinished by hand. The worn kitchen table. The faded curtains. Pieces of home she had stopped truly seeing long ago. I forgot how quiet it is here, she whispered. I almost answered. It used to feel warmer before all this, but I swallowed the thought. Instead, I simply said, "Do you want coffee?" She nodded silently. While I poured 2 cups, I noticed her hands trembling slightly. Not dramatically, just enough to reveal how close she was to breaking. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, where so much of our story had unfolded. The same table where Claire once showed me boutique sketches with hopeful eyes. The same table where I signed checks trying to keep her dream alive. The same table where our relationship slowly cracked apart. For several minutes, only silence existed between us. Then Claire finally whispered, "I was so awful to you." The words nearly shattered me because they carried no defensiveness anymore, only grief. I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug carefully. You were hurting. That's not an excuse. No, I admitted softly. It isn't. Tears filled her eyes almost immediately. I don't even know who I became. I looked at her quietly. Yes, you do. She stared down at the table. You wanted people to admire you, I continued gently. You wanted your life to look meaningful. Her lips trembled. I wanted Dad to be proud of me. There it was, the real wound beneath everything else. Not ambition? Grief. Unfinished grief twisted into desperation. I reached slowly toward the cedar box resting nearby on the counter. There's something I need to show you. Claire frowned slightly while I removed Robert's letter from the envelope. The moment she recognized his handwriting, her breathing changed. What's that? A letter your father wrote before he died. Her face immediately crumpled. He wrote me a letter. I nodded. He said to give it to you when you needed it. Claire took the envelope with shaking hands. The kitchen fell completely silent while she read. I watched every emotion move across her face in waves. Confusion, pain, recognition, then finally, collapse. The moment she reached the paragraph about not building a future that costs the people who love you most, she broke into sobs so raw they physically hurt to hear. I'm sorry, she cried. Oh my God, Mom, I'm so sorry. Years of restrained grief seemed to pour out of her all at once. Not only grief for the business, grief for Robert, for herself, for the daughter she used to be before insecurity swallowed her whole. I moved beside her immediately and wrapped my arms around her while she cried against my shoulder exactly the way she used to as a child. And suddenly, none of the business drama mattered anymore. Not the boutique, not the money, not Brandon, just my little girl falling apart in my arms because she finally understood what she had almost destroyed. I thought if the boutique succeeded, she whispered brokenly, then maybe losing Dad wouldn't feel so meaningless. Tears filled my own eyes instantly. Oh, sweetheart. I thought if people admired me enough, I'd finally feel important. Her honesty cut deeper than anger ever had, because vulnerable truth always hurts more than cruelty. I held her tighter. Your father was proud of you long before Luna and Lace existed. Claire cried harder at that. For nearly an hour, we sat together in the kitchen, talking more honestly than we had in years. She admitted Brandon made her feel powerful at first. He always knew exactly what to say, she whispered. Every insecurity I had, he turned into motivation. I nodded quietly. That's how manipulation works. She looked ashamed. I ignored every warning sign because I needed him to keep believing I was special. No, I corrected gently. You needed someone to help you believe it yourself. That difference mattered, because deep down, Claire's real problem had never been ambition. It was emptiness, the kind people try to fill with applause, success, beauty relationships, or money. Eventually, Claire wiped her face slowly and looked around the kitchen again. I almost lost this house, she whispered. Yes. And you still helped me after everything I said. I smiled sadly. You're my daughter. Fresh tears filled her eyes immediately. I don't deserve you. No child earns their mother. Silence settled softly around us after that. Not painful silence, healing silence. The kind that arrives after truth finally enters a room. Then Claire looked at me carefully. There's something else. My stomach tightened slightly. What? She swallowed hard. Brandon emptied several accounts before everything collapsed. Cold anger moved through me instantly. How much I don't know yet. She looked devastated all over again. But Amanda thinks there may be enough evidence for legal action. I nodded slowly. We'll deal with that. The word mattered. Claire noticed it too. Her eyes filled immediately. You still say we. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Families survive terrible things sometimes. She looked down at our hands. I don't know how to fix everything. You can't fix everything. The truth of that settled quietly between us. Some damage remains. Some trust takes years to rebuild. Some scars never fully disappear. But healing doesn't begin with perfection. It begins with honesty. As evening light faded outside the windows, Claire suddenly asked something small and fragile. Would you teach me Dad's pancake recipe again tomorrow morning? I stared at her for a moment because suddenly she sounded 12 years old instead of 32. Then I smiled softly for the first time in months. Of course. And for the first time since this nightmare began, hope entered the house again. Not loud hope, not glamorous hope. Quiet hope, the kind strong enough to survive reality. Winter arrived quietly in Portland, not with dramatic snowstorms or violent winds, just colder mornings, longer nights, and trees slowly emptying themselves beneath gray skies. 3 months after Luna and Lace officially closed life no longer felt like constant emotional survival. It felt quieter now, sadder in some places, but honest. And honesty, I learned, brings a different kind of peace. The legal investigation into Brandon Cole continued through Amanda Reynolds' office. Several financial irregularities eventually surfaced beyond Claire's business alone. Other small companies had similar complaints involving aggressive consulting contracts and hidden compensation structures. Amanda believed Brandon would likely settle privately before risking public litigation. Claire didn't care anymore. Not really. The boutique was gone. The dream she fought for had collapsed publicly. Social media moved on within weeks, just like it always does. The same strangers who once praised her ambition quickly disappeared once the glamorous image cracked apart. At first, that devastated her. Then, slowly, it freed her. One rainy Saturday morning in January, Claire stood beside me in the kitchen, wearing one of Robert's old flannel shirts while pancake batter dusted flour across the counter. You still make them exactly the same, she murmured softly. Your father would haunt me if I changed the recipe. Claire smiled faintly. Real smiles still came carefully these days, like sunlight after storms. But at least they were real again. We cooked together quietly, while jazz music played softly from the old radio near the window. Outside, rain tapped against the glass in that familiar Portland rhythm Robert used to love. For years after his death, silence haunted this house. Now it felt different. Not empty. Gentle. Claire moved slower these days. Thought slower too. Sometimes I caught her staring out windows for long stretches, like someone rebuilding herself piece by piece internally. Healing is strange that way. People think it arrives dramatically. Usually, it arrives quietly through ordinary moments. Morning coffee, shared meals, laughter returning unexpectedly. One evening, Claire helped me reorganize the garage Robert once used as his woodworking space. Dust floated through pale afternoon light while we sorted old tools and unfinished projects stacked carefully against the walls. At one point, Claire picked up one of Robert's measuring tapes and suddenly started crying again. I spent so much time trying to become impressive, she whispered, that I forgot Dad never cared about impressive. I set down the box in my hands slowly. No, I agreed softly. He cared about character. Claire wiped tears from her face. I hurt you so badly. The words still carried genuine grief every time she said them. And honestly, part of me appreciated that. Not because I wanted her suffering, because accountability matters. Real healing only begins when people fully face the damage they caused. I leaned against Robert's old workbench carefully. You know what hurt most? Claire looked terrified to ask. What? That you stopped seeing me as a person. Her eyes immediately filled again. You became so focused on what you needed from me that you forgot I was grieving too. Aging too. Scared too. She covered her mouth while crying silently. I know. And every time I hesitated financially, you treated love like obedience. The shame on her face was unbearable to watch. I was horrible. You were lost. She shook her head immediately. That's not enough of an excuse. No, I admitted gently. But it's the truth. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Claire quietly asked the question I think she feared most. Do you trust me again? The honesty of it pierced straight through me. I walked closer slowly. Trust doesn't return all at once, sweetheart. Pain crossed her face immediately, but I continued before shame could swallow her again. But love stayed. Tears slid down her cheeks, and trust rebuilds through small, consistent things. Honesty, accountability, time. She nodded slowly. I'll spend the rest of my life earning it back if I have to. I believed she meant that, and strangely enough, that mattered more than perfection ever could. By February, Claire started working part-time at a small local boutique owned by an older woman named Patricia Green. The store wasn't glamorous. No luxury branding, no influencer campaigns, no champagne launch parties. Just beautiful clothes, honest customers. Real work. At first, Claire worried people would judge her for starting over. Then one afternoon, she came home smiling softly after helping an older customer find a dress for her 50th wedding anniversary dinner. She cried in the fitting room because she finally felt beautiful again, Claire told me quietly. And for the first time in years, she paused emotionally. I remembered why I loved fashion in the first place. Not performance. Connection. Humanity. Art. The things Brandon taught her to ignore. One Sunday evening, Susan came over for dinner while rain hammered softly against the windows outside. We ate roast chicken at the kitchen table, while Claire laughed at one of Susan's sarcastic stories about online dating after 60. The sound stopped me for a moment. Claire laughing. Not performing happiness, actually feeling it. Susan noticed my expression immediately. What she asked. I shook my head softly. Nothing. But inside, I was thinking about how close we came to losing each other completely. Later that night, after Susan left, Claire helped me wash dishes. Then quietly said, I used to think success would finally make me feel worthy. I dried a plate slowly before answering. And now, she looked around the little kitchen, at the warm lights, the old cabinets, the home she nearly helped put at risk. Then she smiled sadly. Now I think peace might matter more. I kissed the top of her head gently, the way I used to when she was little. You sound more like your father every day. She cried a little after that, but not broken tears this time. Healing tears. The kind that arrive when people finally stop running from themselves. That spring, Claire planted flowers beside Robert's grave for the first time since his funeral. Yellow tulips. His favorite. We stood there quietly beneath soft gray skies, while wind moved gently through the cemetery trees. I understand your letter now, Claire whispered softly. Then she looked down at the flowers. And I finally understand Mom, too. I slipped my hand into hers. And standing there beside my daughter, I realized something important. Family wounds don't disappear because people apologize. Some scars remain forever. But love, real love, makes room for grief, accountability, forgiveness, and rebuilding all at once. Not perfectly. Patiently. That's what healing actually looks like. Not pretending pain never happened, but choosing each other anyway after the truth finally comes out. Sometimes the people we love most become so desperate to prove themselves that they lose sight of what truly matters. Success, money, recognition, and admiration can feel powerful for a while, but none of those things can replace peace, honesty, or genuine human connection. Diana learned that loving someone does not mean endlessly rescuing them from their own choices. Real love sometimes requires boundaries. Sometimes it means saying no even when your heart is breaking, because protecting someone from consequences forever can slowly destroy both people. Claire learned that self-worth built on appearances will always collapse eventually. She spent so much time chasing validation from strangers that she nearly lost the people who loved her unconditionally. But true healing began the moment she stopped performing success and started facing the truth honestly. And maybe that's the hardest lesson of all: a dream should never cost your dignity, your family, or your peace. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. I'd truly love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to set painful boundaries with someone you loved? And where are you watching from today? Let me know your city and the time there right now. I read more comments than you know.